Young Turks, Cenk, Uygur, and Kasparian with you guys. It's great to be back. And boy, do we have a lot of news for you guys. Stunning testimony, and this time actual stunning testimony from the January 6th hearings. That's not hyperbole. And I think that there might be crimes involved. We'll get to that in a second. And then later tonight, at 5 o'clock to basically 8 o'clock Pacific, 8 o'clock to 11 o'clock Eastern, Colorado, Illinois, New York, Oklahoma, Utah, Mississippi, and South Carolina have elections that we're covering tonight. Tons of progressives in those elections, very important. Just Democrat up against another incumbent Democrat. So that's going to be a very, very competitive race and a very interesting race. So all of that tonight in basically 5 hours of TYT coverage starting right now. But first, let's start with the most dramatic news, which is the hearings. Anna.
All right, well, today the nation heard stunning testimony from former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows' aide, a woman by the name of Cassidy Hutchingson. And the point of her testimony was to disclose what was going on behind the scenes, both before and during the Capitol riots that took place on January 6th. Now, she focused her testimony on something that's quite common during these hearings, which is the fact that so many people around Donald Trump knew what was coming. So in the testimony you're about to hear, Hutchinson testifies that on January 2nd, Rudy Giuliani had actually met with Mark Meadows, who she was an aide for, and then told her that on January 6th, something's gonna happen. What did Giuliani say? Well, here's what she says happened.
Ms. Hutchinson, do you remember Mr. Giuliani meeting with Mr. Meadows on January 2nd, 2021?
I do. He met with Mr. Meadows in the evening of January 2nd, 2021. As Mr. Giuliani and I were walking to his vehicles that evening, he looked at me and said something to the effect of, "Cass, are you excited for the 6th? It's going to be a great day." I remember looking at him and saying, "Rudy, could you explain what's happening on the 6th?" He had responded something to the effect of, "We're going to the Capitol. It's going to be great. The president's going to be there. He's going to look powerful. He's going to be with the members. He's going to be with the senators. Talk to the chief about it. Talk to the chief about it. He knows about it."
So when Giuliani tells her talk to the chief about it, what he is referring to is Mark Meadows, and she promptly went to Mark Meadows. And she's an aide for Meadows. She's curious about what the details are, about what will transpire on January 6th. And there was some indication that Meadows not only knew that something was gonna go down, but he had some concern about what was gonna go down. Let's watch.
After Mr. Giuliani had left the campus that evening, I went back up to our office and I found Mr. Meadows in his office on the couch. He was scrolling through his phone. I remember leaning against the doorway and saying, "I just had an interesting conversation with Rudy, Mark. Sounds like we're going to go to the Capitol." He didn't look up from his phone and said something to the effect of, "There's a lot going on, Cass, but I don't know. Things might get real bad on January 6th.
Now, before we get to the details about the weaponry the rioters had, the information they had beforehand and how Trump reacted to it, let me just say that Trump, prior to this testimony, was concerned about what she would say. He apparently knew that her testimony was gonna be compelling. It absolutely was compelling, so compelling, in fact, that even Bret Baier and other conservative pundits jumped in and talked about how persuasive it was. And that's not a usual response that you typically get from conservatives, certainly on Fox News. And so now he has been reduced to temper tantrums on Truth Social, which we can get to later. But Cenk, this is just yet more evidence that all these people surrounding Donald Trump not only knew that something was about to happen, but that something terrible was about to happen. And it's important to note that Mark Meadows did absolutely nothing to act on his concerns. She testified about that as well.
Yeah, so look, if there are any real prosecutors in this country, if there's real rule of law, Mark Meadows and Donald Trump are now in a lot of trouble. Now, that's a big if though, because I've never seen the law applied to the elites. So we'll see if they do their job or not. But there are two significant crimes here. One is witness tampering, and that gets to the point that Anna was making. Liz Cheney at the end of the hearings talked about how Trump folks, people in Trump world, call the witnesses and tell them, remember, Trump thinks you're a good guy, don't be a bad guy. And he reads the transcripts. So watch what you're saying, okay? So that's witness tampering 101. And so that'll be an easier case. And usually prosecutors want to take the easier case, not the harder case. The second case is seditious conspiracy. This is actual sedition. So I want you guys to watch more of the testimony, and then I want to explain to you why it's seditious conspiracy and why today's testimony, for the first time, in my opinion, gets to Trump aiding and abetting that conspiracy.
Yeah, the testimony today was damning, and she's a persuasive. When I say persuasive, I don't mean that she's trying to make a case here. She's just testifying under oath about what she experienced in the days leading up to January 6th and what happened on January 6th. So let's talk a little bit about what she had to say about what Trump, the president, knew was happening on that day, January 6th. So he was told that there were individuals with some pretty serious weaponry who wanted to attend his rally, which of course preceded the riots that took place on January 6th. He was fully aware of the weaponry that they had, and he actually had no problem with it whatsoever. In fact, what he was more furious about was the safety checks in place, including, having the rally goers go through a security checkpoint to make sure that, they don't have weapons on them. And if they do have weapons on them, they won't be able to get through to get closer to him as he's doing his rally. He didn't like the fact that they were doing those security checks. So in the next video, you're gonna hear more from Cassidy Hutchingson, again, the aide to White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, about this very issue. Let's watch.
I recall Tony and I having a conversation with Mark probably around 10 a.m., 10:15 a.m., where I remember Tony mentioning knives, guns in the form of pistols and rifles, bear spray, body armor, spears, and flagpoles. Spears were one item, flagpoles were one item, and then Tony had relayed to me something to the effect of, and these effing people are fastening spears onto the ends of flagpoles. Mark was sitting on his couch and on his phone, which was something typical. And I remember Tony just got right into it. I was like, sorry, I just want to let you know, and had informed him, like, this is how many people we have outside the mags right now. These are the weapons that we're known to have. It's possible he listed more weapons off that I just don't recall. And gave him a brief and concise explanation, but also fairly thorough. And I remember distinctly Mark not looking up from his phone. And I remember Tony finishing his explanation and it taking a few seconds for Mark to say something, to the point where I almost said, Mark, did you hear him?
So just to clarify and summarize what she said there, she's referring to the fact that she, along with Tony Ornato, every time she mentions Tony, she's talking about the head of Secret Service. They approach Mark Meadows and they're like, yo, there's a bunch of Trump supporters. They have all sorts of weapons. We are concerned. Mark Meadows is sitting on a couch looking down at his phone. He doesn't even bother to look up as they're telling him this. And she was concerned that maybe he didn't hear what they were saying, but luckily, he jumped in before, Cassidy Hutchinson asked him, hey, are you paying attention? And at that point, all he said was, have you talked to Trump about this? And so she had talked about Trump. And what's really interesting is how Trump reacted to this news about his heavily armed supporters. Let's watch that.
The president apparently wanted all attendees inside the official rally space and repeatedly said, quote, they're not here to hurt me. And just to be clear, so he was told again in that conversation, or was he told again in that conversation that people couldn't come through the mags because they had weapons?
Correct.
And that people, his response was to say they can march to the Capitol from the ellipse.
Something to the effect of, take the effing mags away. They're not here to hurt me. Let them in, let my people in. They can march to the Capitol after the rally's over. They can march from the ellipse, take the effing mags away. Then they can march to the Capitol.
So when she says take the effing mags away, referring to what Trump had said in response to the information about the weaponry, he wants to do away with any of the security that would prevent them from going to the rally, the official rally area with the weapons. And he specifically stated, they're not there to hurt me. And afterwards, they can march over to the Capitol knowing full well that they're heavily armed. Cenk.
Yeah, I need you guys to remember that she is a very right wing. This is not a Democrat. This is not just a normal Republican. She worked apparently for Cruz and Scalise. She was working for Mark Meadows, who's one of the worst right wing Tea Party members. So this is true right winger saying, wait, are we really unconcerned about people coming to raid the Capitol with weapons? That's a thing that's not a concern to us. Well, I mean, Mark Meadows, as she explained earlier, said 4 days ago that there was real danger. They knew definitively. Now we know for the first time that all of them, including Donald Trump, knew that the rioters were going to go to the Capitol. So that's a huge part of the evidence. They had to have known that in order for you to prove any crime. He's like, hey man, I just gave a speech. I didn't know they were going to the Capitol and bust in. Well, okay, that's a different story than, no, I know they're going to the Capitol and I want them to have weapons. Let alone later her explaining that Trump knew that they were trying to murder his vice president and he was happy about it.
Yeah, I mean, completely unapologetic about what happened to Mike Pence, both during and as we've experienced after the Capitol riots. And what she did a good job in disclosing to the American people was that, again, there are so many people close to Donald Trump within the White House who knew that something was coming, right? The initial conversation that Cassidy Hutchingson had with Rudy Giuliani about what was to come on January 6th took place on January 2nd. And remember, there's this effort by Trump and those closest to him to pretend as though they knew nothing about January 6th. They were kind of caught off guard by it. But through these hearings, we're learning more and more about the fact that no, they knew. Rudy Giuliani certainly knew. And think about it. He was making these statements to Cassidy Hutchinson on January 2nd. We also learned through previous testimony that Rudy Giuliani knew that the ridiculous theory of installing, these hoax electors was complete BS, and it wasn't grounded in any type of, law or anything like that. But it didn't matter. On January 6th, he decided to add fuel to the fire by, promoting that theory as if there's any type of legal weight or merit behind it. So they knew that there was something violent coming. They knew that they were dealing with individuals who were heavily armed, some with AR-15 style weaponry. And they just kind of went forward with everything that happened. Trump wanted to green light everything that would pave the way for them to do what they did in the nation's capital that day. And you have all of these people, including Rudy Giuliani, stoking the flames. Yeah. Now, go ahead, Cenk.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just wanted to do the last link here because, so I'm going to go a little bit out of order here and ask to go to the last video, video 8, because guys. So they know that they're going with weapons. Trump says, let them in with weapons. But did he know that at any point they were calling for violence specifically against government officials, which would be an enormous help if you were going to prosecute him on seditious conspiracy? Because that means, yes, he wanted them to hurt government officials to stop an official government action so that he could basically overthrow the legitimate government of the United States. Well, let's go to the last video here. And see what he knew or didn't know.
I remember Pat saying something to the effect of, Mark, we need to do something more. They're literally calling for the vice president to be effing hung. And Mark had responded something to the effect of, you heard him, Pat, he thinks Mike deserves it. He doesn't think they're doing anything wrong.
Wow, that is a top aide to the chief of staff saying that the chief of staff had just talked to the president, told him they're looking to murder your vice president, your supporters are. And he says, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and I'm not going to stop it. Well, that's seditious conspiracy. There's no question about it, and they need to prosecute him. Otherwise, you're greenlighting political murder in this country. That you could aid and abet political murder all the way up to the vice president of the United States to get him killed, and that there will be no consequences in law. No, they must prosecute now. They must prosecute.
No word from Attorney General Merrick Garland yet, but when you even have conservatives weighing in on this to talk about how devastating it is for Donald Trump, it would be one of the most embarrassing moments in American history if this Attorney General under Democratic leadership does nothing about it. But I mean, Democrats never cease to amaze me with their fecklessness and their unwillingness to hold the elite accountable for anything that they do, whether it's war crimes or in this case, sedition. But I want to move on to the displays of violence that Donald Trump himself engaged in. And this was also part of Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony that I thought was juicy, to say the least. So let's talk about that. During the House Select Committee hearings on January 6th, we learned that contrary to what we previously thought, Donald Trump did in fact want to make his way to the nation's capital as rioters were basically breaking into the Capitol and threatening his vice president with hanging him, along with other acts of violence. Now, Trump was stopped from doing that, mostly because his security detail, along with White House lawyers, put a stop to it. But before we get to how he reacted to it, let's set the stage. Let's set the scene a little bit, okay? Now, Donald Trump gives this rally speech on January 6th prior to the riots taking place. And at some point he says that he's going to march to the nation's capital with these rioters, right? And at that point, you have Kevin McCarthy, Representative Kevin McCarthy, call Cassidy Hutchinson, who is the aide to White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows at the time, and he's furious about what he heard. So let's hear from Hutchinson over how that conversation went down.
Tell us about the call that day with Leader McCarthy during the president's speech on the ellipse.
I was still in the tent behind the stage, and when you're behind the stage, you can't really hear what's going on in front of you. So when Mr. McCarthy called me with this information, I answered the call and he sounded rushed, but also frustrated and angry at me. And I was confused because I didn't know what the president had just said. He then explained, the president just said he's marching to the Capitol. You told me this whole week you aren't coming up here. Why would you lie to me? I said, I'm not lying. I wasn't lying to you, sir. We're not going to the Capitol. And he said, well, he just said it on stage, Cassidy, figure it out. Don't come up here.
And Hutchinson was asked, well, what was Trump planning to do if he, made his way to the Capitol building? What was his plan? And there were a number of different ideas floated by Trump, including the idea of entering the House chamber. Like, what was he gonna do? But based on her testimony, there's no question about it. Trump absolutely wanted to go to the Capitol with the rioters. And when he was blocked from doing so, he was enraged. And you're about to hear how he reacted in detail in the next clip.
Tony described him as being irate. The president said something to the effect of, I'm the effing president, take me up to the Capitol now. To which Bobby responded, sir, we have to go back to the West Wing. The president reached up towards the front of the vehicle to grab at the steering wheel. Mr. Engel grabbed his arm, said, sir, you need to take your hand off the steering wheel. We're going back to the West Wing. We're not going to the Capitol. Mr. Trump then used his free hand to lunge towards Bobby Engel. And when Mr. Renato had recounted this story to me, he had motioned towards his clavicles.
So either assault or attempted assault in response to just the refusal to drive Donald Trump to the Capitol building. Refusal to do it. And I mean, they obviously did the right thing, but what's incredible about this testimony is that, look, we've heard about Trump act like a child. We've heard about him and his temper tantrum, certainly on social media, which, by the way, he's melting down as we speak on Truth Social, attacking Hutchinson for her handwriting. That's what he's been reduced to because he's a complete and utter child and loser. But Cenk, he got physical with the driver there who refused to take orders from Trump in driving him to the Capitol building. Yeah,
so I think the more relevant part of her testimony was proving that Trump knew there was violence at the Capitol and aided and abetted that violence. But this part of the testimony catches the eye better. Everybody can understand attacking your own driver and trying to grab the wheel and trying to choke basically an employee. And everybody gets that that's nuts, totally unhinged. And so then, of course, the next questions are, how does that affect things? Legally, I don't think you're gonna get him on a charge of attacking the Secret Service employees. I'd be very surprised by that. Politically, I think his base will like this. I'm not 1% exaggerating or joking. That means he actually wanted to go to the Capitol, which some people were blaming him for not going to the Capitol, right? To join the protesters. They're gonna be like, look, he really, really did wanna go, right? Number two, they'll call the Secret Service deep state for keeping him away from the Capitol. And number three, they'll like that he committed violence against them. So politically, I don't think it's gonna hurt him at all.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. So that part of the testimony was damning for people like us who don't think the president of the United States or anyone should have the ability to assault someone who, it quite honestly is protecting them from doing something incredibly stupid. And that's what the driver and his head of Secret Service, the head of his Secret Service detail were doing there. They were trying to stop a bad situation from getting even worse. But what we also learned, honestly, is, again, like Trump's rage goes further than just having these meltdowns on social media. He has no problem with getting physical. He has no problem with being absolutely horrible toward people around him, including individuals tasked with, keeping areas of the White House clean. And I thought that this part of Hutchinson's testimony, where she discloses how Trump reacted to his former Attorney General, William Barr, telling the Associated Press that there was no evidence of widespread voter fraud, was just illustrative of who he really is behind the scenes. Again, it goes way further than just having these temper tantrums on social media. Let's just watch how Trump reacted to news of William Barr essentially telling the Associated Press, no, there's no evidence of widespread voter fraud.
I left the office and went down to the dining room, and I noticed that the door was propped open and the valet was inside the dining room changing the tablecloth off of the dining room table. He motioned for me to come in and then pointed towards the front of the room near the fireplace mantle and the TV, where I first noticed there was ketchup dripping down the wall and there's a shattered porcelain plate on the floor. The valet had articulated that the president was extremely angry at the Attorney General's AP interview and had thrown his lunch against the wall.
So Cenk, earlier in the show, you had referenced just how conservative Cassidy Hutchinson is. I mean, she was the aide for former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, after all. Also did work for Ted Cruz and all sorts of unsavory individuals. And I think that clip really, helped you double down on that point, because instead of saying ketchup, she says catch-up. So already, she's not one of us, but her testimony was compelling.
Yeah, so look, again, if you don't know that Trump is unhinged, you're trying super hard not to know it. And there's no amount of evidence that we can give you that'll change your mind. And he, in this case, remember how he famously said, I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and get away with it? Well, I mean, he was in favor of his vice president being murdered. She said in the testimony, that he knew it and didn't want to stop it. So catch up against the wall. I mean, again, I think his base will like that he threw the plate. They like that he attacks his subordinates physically. Anything where he's what we look at as insane and unhinged and irresponsible and assault and all of those things, you have to look at it from their perspective. The right wingers like all of that. I don't think there's any part of that portion of the testimony that they will object to. I'm genuinely curious. I want to play that video one more time of her explaining, Trump's reaction to Pence. Whether, if the right wingers ever believe anything, if they believe that, are they okay? Forget the catch up, forget attacking the Secret Service. Are they okay with political murder? And I genuinely don't know the answer to that. I think a lot of Republicans might say, yeah, I'm okay with it. So in the last video, Pat that she's referring to is Pat Cipollone, who is the White House counsel. So the White House counsel and Mark Meadows are talking about it. I want to play that one more time.
I remember Pat saying something to the effect of, Mark, we need to do something more. They're literally calling for the vice president to be effing hung. And Mark had responded something to the effect of, you heard him, Pat. He thinks Mike deserves it. He doesn't think they're doing anything wrong.
He doesn't think that they're doing anything wrong in trying to murder the vice president. So right wingers, Republicans, conservatives, MAGA, are you guys okay with that? I don't know. I think you might be.
Well, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll switch topics to discuss Kamala Harris's disastrous interview on CNN. She was asked questions about how the Democrats, along with the White House, plan on helping women who have just had their reproductive rights stripped away from them. And spoiler alert, they have no plan in place. We'll be right back.
All right, back on TYT, Cenk, Anna, Tor Avix, Blue Dream Gaming, and Jeb H with you guys. Please clap.
No, don't do Jeb like that, Cenk. Don't do it.
No, I assume it's a good guy, Jeb. Although Jeb Bush, being a member of TYT, because he likes our anti-Trump commentary, would be hilarious. But no, sorry, Jeb. Thank you for joining. We appreciate it. And I hate to compare you to that other guy. I wouldn't want anyone else being compared to this Cenk, so I hear you. Okay, anyways, thank you guys. Hit the join button below to join them or tyt.com/join. Come do the show with us. All right, Casper.
What do you say to Democratic voters who argue, wait a minute, we worked really hard to elect a Democratic president and vice president, Democratic-led House, a Democratic-led Senate. Do it now.
But do what now? What now? I mean, listen, what we did, we extended the child tax credit for the first year.
I'm sorry, when I say do it now, act legislatively to make abortion rights legal.
Women in this country are doomed because you just heard from Vice President Kamala Harris during her interview with Dana Bash on CNN, and she revealed just how ill-prepared and honestly careless the Democratic Party under the leadership of the Biden administration is in responding to the fact that the Supreme Court has reversed Roe, effectively stripping women of the constitutional protections necessary to ensure that they have reproductive rights. Now, if that part of the interview didn't infuriate you enough, you're about to hear from Kamala Harris respond to calls to do something about the legislative filibuster in the Senate that requires 60 senators to vote in favor of something in order for any bill to pass. Now, the idea is, well, for reproductive rights, there should be some sort of carve out. So while Democrats have a majority in Congress, they can get these protections passed. But let's take a look at what Kamala Harris has to say about that strategy, that suggestion.
One of the ways you can do it, obviously, the only way that is legislatively, procedurally possible is by doing away with the filibuster on this issue. President Biden told my colleague Anderson Cooper he would be okay with eliminating the filibuster to pass voting rights and, quote, maybe more. Would you support eliminating the filibuster in order to pass federal legislation for abortion rights?
Right now, given the current composition of the Senate, the votes aren't there.
But would you use the bully pulpit to say, yes, I support it?
Well, here's the thing. I understand why you're asking the question, but the reality of it is we don't even get to really answer that in terms of whether it happens or not if we don't have the numbers in the Senate. And again, that's why I keep coming back to the importance of an election that is only 130 odd days away, because it really does matter.
It really does matter. I mean, listen, guys, we could actually fight for this right now. Kind of like how we did for raising the debt ceiling back in 2021. But we could use this tragedy for our own fundraising and campaigning purposes. So I'm gonna campaign right now. Please elect more of us, even though we've completely dropped the ball and haven't delivered what we said we would deliver as we were campaigning. When those runoff senatorial elections were taking place in Georgia, and we were telling the American people how important it was to ensure that those two Democratic candidates won the Senate seats, because that would mean we'd have the majority and we could actually get our agenda done. We were lying actually about that. We were just lying. Because even with that majority, we have done nothing with it. And real quick, I just want to give you the details on what I mean about the debt ceiling argument here. So in order to address an impasse over the debt ceiling, Democratic and Republican leaders have agreed, this is a piece from December of 2021, have agreed to a measure that raises the debt limit with just 51 votes, instead of the 60 that are required if a bill is filibustered. Now, Cenk, if they had failed to raise the debt ceiling, if they failed to make that carve out in the filibuster to raise the debt ceiling, what would happen to their stock portfolios?
Well, their stock portfolios would crash and they would lose a lot of money.
Wow. Seems like there was a pretty significant incentive there for them to fight for a carve out in the filibuster. But when it comes to our reproductive rights, which they purport to be in support of, no, what can we do? You just gotta elect more of us. Do nothing, pathetic Democrats. Please elect more of us. Yeah. Now, both Biden and Kamala Harris should be locked in a basement. They shouldn't be doing press interviews because every time they speak, it's infuriating.
Yeah, so there's a couple of different issues here. First, when Dana Bash asks for, hey, are you guys going to act on abortion? She's like, and do what? Are you serious? Well, you could pass a federal law. I mean, and I thought at first she was being glib, like, no, I'm gonna need you to ask a specific question because I don't wanna answer it. No, I think she genuinely didn't know what Dana Bash was talking about, because then she mentioned the child tax credit. If I was the president and the vice president and this happened, I wouldn't have had a meeting now. I would have had a meeting when the original leak happened about what are all of our options. But at a bare minimum, after the court has actually ruled, did you guys not have a goddamn meeting about what all of your options are to fight back? And I'm telling you right now, I don't think they did. I don't think they had a single meeting about it, because they know for a fact that they're not going to do anything. They're not even gonna try to do anything. So that's why Kamala Harris is like, why? Well, what could we do? You moron, you went on national TV without checking what you can do on abortion when you're going to talk about abortion after Roe has been overturned. That's unbelievable. She's a national embarrassment. Okay, then number two, finally, Bash lays it out. You know, you could pass a law, they're called bills. And so she's like, oh, yeah, now there aren't the votes for it. So give us more votes. But wait. Let's two things on that. Number one, Anna's 100% right. You guys only needed 50 votes on the debt ceiling. You made an exception to the filibuster. You're not even talking about making an exception in the case of women's rights. By the way, also voting rights, and also your so-called entire economic agenda. So you are saying here definitively I care so much more about my money in the stock market than I do about women's rights or voting rights. We don't care about you. We only care about ourselves. When it was their money on the line, they immediately got rid of the filibuster, immediately made an exception for it. It wasn't even controversial. Do you remember the debate? You don't remember the debate, right? Because there was no debate. They're like, oh, everybody want to protect their own money? And all the millionaires agree. All the millionaires agree. They protect their money. Women's rights, who cares? Vote for us. Why? What the hell would you do? What the hell would you do? You wouldn't do anything. That gets to the last point. So she says, oh, there's a couple of elections, she said in other parts of the interview. There's in North Carolina, Georgia, and they're very important elections. Are they? First of all, let's say that you got a couple more senators. Would you then get rid of the filibuster?
Nope.
There's no indication you would. They asked her about Joe Biden and his stance on the filibuster. What does she think? They asked her specifically, Dana Bash specifically asked, what do you think about getting rid of the filibuster? She said the president has spoken on it. The president, you heard the quote from Bash. The president only said maybe on voting rights, sure, and maybe other stuff. That's not a position. That's not saying, hey, you elect 2 more Democratic senators, then we don't have to worry about Manchin and Sinema. We're gonna get rid of the filibuster. We're gonna get women's rights. We're gonna get voting rights, etc. No, they don't even say that. They're just telling you, give us more power and we'll make other excuses. And we make no promises at all to get rid of the filibuster. No promises at all to do anything we've ever said. Understand this, because mainstream media brainwashes everybody. They gaslight everybody. All of the politicians are liars. You all know that. You know it in your gut. You know it when you watch the videos. But then you turn on CNN, MSNBC, you read New York Times, and they tell you, no, these are honorable people, wonderful strategists, and Democrats are in favor of women's rights. Really? Because I haven't seen it. And I can show you definitive evidence right there. They're not gonna do a goddamn thing. The Republicans are worse, but that is not a campaign strategy. That is not principles. That is not something people can say, yes, we've got people on our side. These Democrats are cowards, they're corrupt, and they don't have your back. They're goddamn liars, and you would all know that if mainstream media didn't lie to you 24/7 to protect them.
And I just want to juxtapose what Kamala Harris said to what the former head of the Republican National Committee, Michael Steele, said of Republicans if they had, and will very likely have, a majority in Congress, even if it's a simple majority in the Senate. What would they do if they get hold and control of both chambers of Congress and the presidency? Would they pass a law, a federal law, banning abortion? And here's what he has to say. Just understand the juxtaposition here, the difference in understanding power.
They will pass a federal ban on abortion. Do you believe that would happen, Michael?
Yes, without doubt or hesitation. They'll set the marker. They'll set the marker, and if they have the House and the Senate,
will they overturn the filibuster to do it?
Absolutely, absolutely, because it's in their base's interest to do so. That's the difference politically between the two parties. Republicans will go, oh yeah, the Constitution and the filibuster, all the traditions, the sanctity of the Senate. They don't give a rat's patootie about that when it's the bottom line in politics and power.
He goes on to talk about how the Democratic Party seems to have this admiration for tradition and the importance of the Senate parliamentarian and the filibuster. But do they really, or do they use those arbitrary rules and arbitrary traditions as an excuse to not accomplish a damn thing? And it seems like it's always one convenient excuse after the next, even though there's historical evidence, including, by the way, the passage of the Civil Rights Bill and the Voting Rights Bill under Lyndon B. Johnson. You look at that historical evidence. When it came to the Civil Rights Bill, Lyndon Johnson needed to persuade literally like dozens of lawmakers to sign on. And he was relentless, using the bully pulpit, using threats when he needed to, using certain policy issues as leverage against the members of Congress who were standing in his way. Is there any strategy from the Democratic Party today? Any strategy at all? Dana Bash asked Kamala Harris a question about whether or not the Biden administration is considering using federal land to provide abortion access to women who now are banned from getting abortions in red states. And she's like, we haven't talked about it. Have you guys talked about anything? No, you haven't. So what is the case to vote for you? Fear mongering about the Republican Party over and over again is not gonna work. And I love how in the beginning of that interview with Cenk, this is the final thing I'll say, when she begins to answer Dana Bash's question, she starts talking about the child tax credit. Are you bragging about the child tax credit that has expired? That you guys claimed you were gonna make permanent, but it expired? You think you're gonna take that to the campaign trail and the American people are gonna be like, yeah, you guys nailed it. You guys nailed, thanks for that expired program that I don't benefit from anymore. Yeah, you guys nailed it.
So Michael Steele is not just a former Republican, he's the former head of the Republican Party. And he's just told you, oh yeah, the Republicans get in charge. They're gonna get rid of that filibuster immediately and ban abortion everywhere. Not just the red states, California, New York, Hawaii, Rhode Island, gone. Abortion is not legal, and they're gonna start putting women in prison. They're gonna start putting doctors in prison. Okay, their side is willing to do anything and everything. They've been trying to tear down Roe v. Wade for 50 years. They were relentless. Our side, Roe gets overturned. They're like, well, we didn't even have a meeting about it. I don't know. We're not gonna do anything. Give us more power, and then we still won't do anything. And then what will they ask for next? They'll ask for 60 senators because they don't want to get rid of the filibuster. And it's 100% right. It ain't about the parliamentarian. They don't care about that at all. It's nothing but a lie. All they care about is the filibuster protects their donors. That way they don't have to take embarrassing votes on paid family leave, which the donors don't want, higher wages, which the donors don't want. All of these things that help the American workers, which the donors don't want. That's why they want the filibuster. And all of this, women's rights, voting rights, are collateral damage in the corruption, the infinite corruption of the Democratic Party. They lie to you 24/7. They have no plan to do anything. And when they had the 60 votes, when they had a super majority under Obama, did they do anything? We're gonna talk more about it in the show later, because AOC now is even pretending that they couldn't. No, they chose not to do anything about it. Obama and Pelosi both said, not a priority, don't care. But when it comes to money, it's always the #1 priority for corrupt, lying, horrible Democratic politicians. Everything I say about Democrats is twice as true for Republicans. Don't ever let anybody lie to you that Republicans are any better. They're the scum of the earth. They institutionalize corruption, but at least they're obvious about it. I mean, you'd have to be an idiot not to know the Republicans are corrupt and for the rich. But the Democrats pretend to be your friends, and the minute they get a chance, they help the Republicans rob you blind, and they never fight for you. You have to get rid of every goddamn Democratic incumbent that is in the establishment. Everyone in Democratic leadership is horrible. They're all liars. They're never gonna help you. They are enemies. They're not our goddamn colleagues. They're not our goddamn friends. They're not on our side. You have to vote for progressives who are going to take on and yes, fight Democratic leadership. Hey, progressives in Congress, I got news for you. Democratic leadership does not agree with you on a single issue, not on a single issue, and they fight you 1,000 times more effectively than Republicans do. If you don't realize that there are enemies and not our friends or allies, then you missed the whole goddamn point, and you're useless up there if you're not fighting them. Kamala Harris and Joe Biden will never do anything about women's rights. She just told you. So what are you gonna do, sit there and take it? Or are you gonna get new Democratic leadership? Are you gonna fight them so that we can actually have anyone at all to represent us? That's up to you guys.
And finally, let me just say, if I were the nation's first vice president of the United States, female vice president of the United States, and reproductive rights were rolled back and stripped from women under an administration that I'm serving under, I'd be on the warpath. But she's just chilling. And that's the part that's just so incredibly insulting about all of this. All right, we gotta take a quick break. When we come back, we'll get into that AOC story where she provides some cover for Obama's failures in codifying Roe v. Wade, even though he had a supermajority in the Senate. We've got that story and more, don't miss it. We'll be right back.
All right, back on TYT, Cenk and Anna with you guys. All sorts of new members as well. Dan Raff, Danny, Rose Opal Dragon, Galfar, Paratrooper Chad, Zane the Magic Puff Dragon. They all just joined by hitting the join button below on YouTube. If you guys want us to represent you, if you want us to have that rage and passion, God knows somebody needs to have it on our side, then come join us. Come join us, make us stronger so they hear our screams into the abyss. Because no one in Washington cares until you scream it in their goddamn ears. Then they're like, oh, you're being uncivil. I'm just here robbing you. I was picking your goddamn pocket. What are you being uncivil for? Guys, never anything physical. We're the good guys. But should you be screaming in their ears? Goddamn right you should. Because they're never gonna do anything for you. All right, to make it lighter, LJ Wombology wrote in, Cenk disregarding Anna's ketchup joke is a crime.
Yeah, I agree, 100%, yeah.
Okay, all right. That was me trying to lighten it up for a second.
Yeah, ready to move on to stories?
Yeah.
All right, let's do it. So, progressive lawmaker Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has unfortunately decided to provide cover for the failures of the Obama administration back in 2009 when he had a supermajority in the Senate and had the ability to codify women's reproductive rights, which would have put women in red states in a much better position today. But alas, he went from campaigning on that issue, saying that he would pass a federal law protecting reproductive rights, to being a president who said, it's actually not one of my legislative priorities, okay? I know if you really care about that issue, you voted for me because of that issue. It's not really a priority once I'm elected, you know. Anyway, let me just note, there is a caveat. AOC also did something wonderful in sharing resources for women living in these red states, certain ways that they can still practice their reproductive rights and kind of get around the reproductive restrictions that are put in place in some of these red states. She had a tattletale on Twitter who was like, oh, AOC, look what she's doing, everybody. Look, she's showing people how to get around abortion bans. And she was defiant about it and said, so what? So I appreciated that. But I don't think that progressive voters put her in Congress to provide cover for the failed Democratic establishment, but here we are. So this all happened in the context of, a back and forth with her supporters. I think this is on Instagram, but she had posted this. Pro-choice politics with real power and numbers is sadly a much more recent phenomenon in the United States than many realize, like extremely recent. People say, oh, Dems had years and years to do this, but did you know that the first time the US ever elected a pro-choice majority to the House was in 2018? The Democratic Party / voters simply did not have the voters or solidarity on this issue that they do now. And swing state voters weren't willing to support strong, reliably pro-choice policies until very recently. It's still shaky in some areas of the party. From 2018 to 2020, we had Trump, so codifying Roe didn't go anywhere. And in 21, the House successfully did pass it, but the filibuster is blocking it in the Senate. So not only is there some cover there for Obama's failures, but also more regurgitation of the excuses that we've heard from corporate Democrats about this. Now, another Instagram user asked her, I keep seeing that Obama could have codified Roe. Is that true? And honestly, she gave more of the same. I don't really feel like reading through the same excuses that we've heard from corporate Democrats. And yeah, I'm being harsh because this isn't a joke. I'm not interested in any progressive that we here at TYT fought for to get elected into Congress to now turn around and provide cover for the very people who are sitting around twiddling their thumb without a care in the world as our rights are being stripped away. Not interested. Obama absolutely could have codified Roe, but as I've shared with you before, I think it's important to read his exact quotes on the matter because when he was campaigning, let's go to graphic 4 here. He had a completely different take. In 2007, Obama promised Planned Parenthood that the first thing I'd do as president would be to sign the Freedom of Choice Act, which effectively codifies Roe v. Wade. Now he says the bill is, quote, and this is a direct quote from Obama in 2009, not my highest legislative priority, as he put it at a recent news conference. I think that's relevant information to share with your supporters, AOC. The fact that he went from campaigning about passing, these protections for women, the first thing I'm gonna do. And then as soon as he gets elected, not really a legislative priority. And I'm not buying this argument that, there's just there were Democrats who weren't strongly in favor of reproductive rights at the time. Well, back in the 1960s, there were all sorts of lawmakers on both sides of the aisle who weren't in favor of equality in this country, who weren't in favor of passing a civil rights bill. But Lyndon B. Johnson was able to do it. Because guess what he did? He rolled up his sleeves and he went to work. He understood what political power is. He understood how to use carrots and sticks. And I apologize, I'm about to read some graphics right now, and I know it sounds dense, but it's just really important for you guys to understand, including for progressive lawmakers like AOC to understand that if you think it's impossible when you have a majority, much less a supermajority in the Senate, you're just weak. Obama went into the presidency already giving up on reproductive rights. He didn't even try. Okay. And so what did LBJ do in an effort to essentially ensure that he had the votes he needed to pass the civil rights bill? Well, Johnson took off his jacket. This is according to a piece in The Atlantic. Took off his jacket and tore into the legislative process intimately and tirelessly. The best hope of moving the civil rights bill from the House Rules Committee, whose segregationist chairman, Howard Smith of Virginia, had no intention of relinquishing it, was a procedure called a discharge petition. If a majority of House members sign a discharge petition, a bill is taken from the committee to the chagrin of its chairman. Johnson made the petition his own personal crusade. And again, he was relentless. After receiving a list of 22 House members vulnerable to pressure on the petition, the president immediately ordered the White House switchboard to get them on the phone wherever they could be found. Johnson engaged in an army of lieutenants, businessmen, civil rights leaders, labor officials, journalists, and allies on the Hill to go out and find votes for the discharge position. He cut a deal that secured half a dozen votes from the Texas delegation. He showed Martin Luther King Jr. a list of uncommitted Republicans, and as the author and historian Caro writes, told King to work on them. He directed one labor leader to talk to every human you could, saying, if we fail on this, then we fail in everything. As a leading Southern senator put it, we could have beaten John Kennedy on civil rights, but not Lyndon Johnson. Cenk, what happened? What happened to politicians who understood power and were willing to wield it to get things done? Now we have progressives providing cover for useless, feckless Democrats in Congress and in the presidency in years past.
So I know exactly what happened. I detail it in my book that's coming up. Money happened. 1976 to 78, Supreme Court passed 2 decisions saying that you are allowed to give limitless money to politicians. And what did corporations and really wealthy do? They immediately, literally purchased our politicians. And then from then on, both Republicans and Democrats, that's a key part, and Democrats became the tools of the rich and of corporate power. So Obama and Biden are liars. They lied during the campaign trail. Biden says, I'm gonna schedule marijuana, total lie. I'm gonna get rid of $10,000 in student debt, didn't do it. These are all executive actions, he could do it tomorrow. I'm gonna do 20 things on his economic agenda, never did any of them, never intended to do any of them. The $15 minimum wage was supposed to be the bare minimum, didn't do that. And in fact, he had his top allies in the Senate vote against it because he's a liar, never, ever, ever intended it. And so now this is not allowed in mainstream media for people to say the truth and say, yeah, our politicians are obvious liars. Obama said on the campaign trail that it would be his first priority. Then he got in office and he said, no, I was lying, I don't care. It's not even a priority. He had a super majority. Yeah, but I used it to pass Romney Care, a Republican healthcare plan written by the Heritage Foundation, the most conservative think tank in the country. That's the only thing he passed because they're all economically Republicans. But you'll never hear that in mainstream media who do nothing but lie for them. But AOC is in a different category. AOC is suffering under the second problem. She doesn't take corporate campaign cash. She's not influenced by that, and I don't think she's at all corrupt. Her problem, including all of the progressives in Congress, including Bernie Sanders, is that they got brainwashed by Washington. The minute you step into Washington, they tell you the most important thing to do is to kiss Democratic ass. And if you're not kissing Democratic leadership's ass 24/7, you will be tarred and feathered. And that part is true, you will be tarred and feathered. The mainstream media will viciously attack you and say that every problem that the Democrats have is your fault. Hey, it's called courage, look into it. Yeah, take the goddamn hits and fight. So yes, AOC has taken 1 million hits. Yes, she's fought more than all of them. Yes, there's good progressives that fight on some issues, but they still are under the spell of Washington. They live in that toxic culture, and they believe in a deference to authority. Biden and Obama, you great Democratic leaders. You think AOC would call Obama a liar? Not one progressive in Congress would ever call Obama a liar. They would consider that the rudest, most offensive thing ever. Women's rights being flushed down the toilet, a little less offensive in Washington. No, I'm not exaggerating or joking. If you called Obama a liar in Washington, that would be considered 1,000 times more offensive than Roe v. Wade being overturned. 1,000 times more offensive. In fact, here, I'll make a prediction for you. At some point, some Democratic operative and everyone in mainstream media will even use this exact clip to attack me and any ally of mine, saying, can you believe that he dared to call the beloved angelic Barack Obama and Joe Biden liars? How dare you? No, I'm not here to cover up their lies. I'm here to tell you the truth because I'm in news. He lied, Biden lied, and they progressives in Congress who are not at all corrupt, but who are literally, I'm sorry, I know you're gonna hate it, but you've been brainwashed into thinking that you're supposed to be compliant and complicit. No, you're supposed to super aggressively fight back against our opponents, which are also clearly Democratic leadership. And if you don't understand they're our opponents, when they destroy every bill of ours, and when they make sure that we cannot get women's rights and voting rights passed, then you're hopeless. So wake up already, I'm trying to help you. Wake the goddamn up. Obama didn't do anything because he didn't want to do anything.
Wasn't his legislative priority. When the man tells you who he is, you should believe him, AOC. You weren't elected in that position to defend the weakness of Democrats. You're supposed to fight back against them. And unfortunately, in this incredibly important moment, we're hearing about how What could have Obama done? He had a super majority in the Senate, but what could he have done?
Okay, Anna, just one quick thing. It's not just about the past. They could do it right now. They could do it to Kristen Sinema. She claims to be for women's rights. She claims to be pro-choice, but she's preventing us voting and making abortion legal nationwide because she says, no, the filibuster is more important to me than women's rights are. Then why don't you actually put her on the spotlight? Say that one right there, Kristen Sinema. She's a goddamn liar. She doesn't believe in women's rights. She believes in the stock market. She believes in getting rich. She helped to lift the filibuster so they could raise the debt ceiling. So she thinks the stock market's important enough, but women's rights and voting rights are not important enough. Women aren't important enough. Black people aren't important enough. That's Kristen Sinema. Why don't you do that? Why doesn't AOC do that? Why doesn't every Justice Democrat do that? Oh, rule number one in Washington, kiss the ass of Democratic colleagues. That's not, I know, I formed the organization, Justice Democrats. That is not why we formed it. It is the exact opposite reason of why we formed it. You're supposed to fight them. It's Kristen Sinema, it's Joe Manchin, it's Joe Biden. Name the goddamn names. What's Pelosi's plan? Nothing, zero. Name the goddamn names. Fight them, otherwise step the hell aside, because you aren't doing any good.
All right, that does it for our first hour. We're gonna take a brief break and we'll be right back.
Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Young Turks. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, Cenk Uygur, and I'll see you soon.